Welcome to the program. I'm Julianna Forlano. This is ActTV's Act Now. Thanks for joining me today. On the program, Ben Burgis is joining me to go through the progressive news headlines, one of my favorite segments. We're going to start with talking about how Manchin and Sinema are defending the filibuster because the filibuster defends corporate power. And who better to talk to than Ben Burgis about that? He is a writer for Jacobin. He has a new book out. And he's a professor of philosophy. He's always great. Welcome to this program. So I think you're going to love our conversation, which ranges from that to the new study about how a wealth tax could raise 2.3 billion people out of crushing poverty. You think we already know this, but in black and white, it's important. And why is it important to have these studies about things that people generally could just tell you? Well, we'll talk about that with Ben as well. And then we're going to discuss Striketober. And was it actually a farce? How do we look at it in historical context? And then finally, we are going to finish it up. Virginia has a new anti-CRT law, and Ben believes that the left is going about the messaging around why these anti-critical race theory laws for schools and education are not being fought well with the current, the current talking points. So stay attuned. Progressive news headlines coming up. All right, Ben Burgis, philosophy professor, Jacobin contributor, host of Give Them an Argument, the podcast, author of several books, including the brand new one now out in paperback, Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. Thanks for joining me to do the headlines today.
Thank you so much, Juliana.
All right, so just before we get to the headlines, what did Christopher Hitchens get right? Where did he go wrong? And why does he still matter? Go.
Sure.
Just give me the whole book. No.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just,
I mean, I love Christopher Hitchens, but I don't,
Yeah. Well, see, there you go. That's why I wrote the book. Because
I don't know where he went wrong. He didn't seem to go wrong to me. He always seemed like, when you hear him talk, you're like,
Yeah. I mean, I think, somebody I have very mixed feelings about it. That's part of why I wrote the book. I think that some of his like turn post 9/11, on foreign policy, I think that was definitely going wrong. But that said, I think that he did decades of good work, and I think that even in the last 10 years, it's complicated. So I'm trying to like kind of figure all that out in the book, and why somebody with good intentions and who started out agreeing with a lot of the things that you and I agree with, would kind of end up where he did on those subjects. And that's
really interesting, because I'm seeing a slide from so many people who start where we are and then all of a sudden wind up on Rumble supporting Dan Bongino's, empire of Trumpendom. I don't want to name any names because I don't want them to yell at me with their huge audiences, but
yeah. Well,
I mean,
if anybody wants to give me a show on Rumble, I'll take it. But they have I get what you're saying, right? What they're using those platforms to promote, is like they get sort of obsessed with like owning the libs, like sort of rises above all else in their politics, and like and that becomes like the overriding principle, and people end up going to some pretty bad places. I totally know what you're saying about that. I think that, I think that with Hitchens, it's a little bit different than those guys you're talking about, but there is something that I think is the same. And, but at the same time, I think that he did like all of this good work. Like he wrote this fantastic book about the Clintons. He wrote great stuff about Henry Kissinger, Mother Teresa. And I think all of that is worth reading. And I think that there is something, I think whether we're talking about Hitchens or whether we're talking about the guys that you were talking about just now, without naming any names, I think that we do sometimes make a mistake on the left where we sort of assume that like everybody secretly agrees with us. So if so like if you started out agreeing with us and then you don't, it must just be because like somebody handed you like an envelope full of cash in an alley or something.
Right.
And I'm not saying there's never anything to that. I can think of some example, but they
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like a large audience and something that goes viral on any one of these platforms is a handful of cash handed to you by an algorithm that promotes a neoliberal agenda. So it's not exactly like the Russian agent came and handed you cash, but somebody is handing you cash, and now all of a sudden you may actually have politics in the same place, but you're handing a lot of arguments to people who don't have those politics in the same place to further entrench themselves in fascism. I guess that would be one word,
Yeah. I mean, I think audience capture is definitely a thing that like people have. People are getting rewarded for something, and they start playing to a crowd. Like I'm no doubt about it, right? But like at the same time, I also think that if we just sort of assume that like everybody is, that like those are the options, right? You're either saying what we're saying, or you're like, you're just like, you just took the money basically, right? That I think we're kind of missing the boat on a lot of stuff, because I think that means that we're not thinking very hard about why somebody might, end up in bad places politically, and it makes it a little bit harder for us to like, see it coming and, maybe like talk people off the ledge.
Yes. Well, I didn't even know we were going to go there, but that's what I like about having you on, because we always go to these interesting places. So thank you for that. Your book you have to pre-order it. It's according to the website, it's you've got to put a pre-order in. So get on the horn now.
Well, what website do you say where it says pre-order?
Yours.
Mine. Okay. Yeah. No, I've got to
get on there. Fix the link.
Got to ask the guy to change that. It's the same link, but that's order now, not pre-order. So.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. No, good. So it's out for order. Don't forget Christopher Hitchens, what he got right, how he went wrong, and why he still matters. We should have an entire interview about that book. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll send you a date right after this. But for this week on the headlines, I mean, everyone's talking about this issue of the filibuster, the voting rights bill that's about to fail. The Democrats they're making a bid to pass a voting rights bill that would offset the march of the state level voting restrictions. It is currently doomed to fail to a Republican filibuster that is, of course, aided by the help of two Democratic senators, I guess, in their name. I mean, that's the party they're affiliated with, who I am just so tired of even mentioning, so I'm going to skip it. And basically, the Democrats are also, in this instance, if they can't get rid of the filibuster altogether, then they're trying to mount an effort to require for the voting rights bill, specifically that old style talking filibuster, that after lots and lots of jibber jabbering would finally allow the 51 senator majority vote instead of the 60 now needed, so that they could move forward after all the senators had exhausted both their opportunities to speak and their right-wing talking points and all of America. Joe Biden is currently finally endorsing this in order to pass that voting rights legislation. Well, you've said in the past that the Senate filibuster isn't just an impediment to even mildly progressive legislation. This is a quote from one of your pieces, that it's one of the most anti-democratic aspects of a deeply anti-democratic institution, and it should be abolished immediately. What do you make of what's going on right now today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point about the talking filibuster is really important, because, I think when people hear that word filibuster, a lot of people still, if they're not political obsessive, what they have in their heads is like the Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of filibuster, right? Or which is even like in the actual historical cases that are a lot more representative than than that one, than what's portrayed, Jimmy Stewart is doing in the movie is, right? Like if you even think about like Southern senators filibustering against civil rights laws, which is historically like mostly what it was used for, then they're like standing up there for hours and hours and hours and reading their pecan pie recipes and reading from the phone book and like because they just have to fill the time. It's like an endurance thing. And now, literally, as I understand it, the way that it works is that like a aide, to like the majority leader will send out like an email, and like it doesn't even have to be the senator, himself or herself. It could just be like a staffer, will reply to the email saying, "Yeah, my senator, wants to block that," and that's it. That's all you have to do. That's the whole thing. It's ridiculous, and it's particularly like the Senate itself. Like I like, don't agree with him about everything, but I like Eli Mistel's line about how we abolishing the Senate, should have been like a condition for like surrender and Appomattox, that they, like it's a horrible institution,
sure.
because
it's not representative.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's I mean, it's wildly, unrepresentative, that like, California or Texas, has
two guys.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And they have the same two in and then like they have the same two from like Rhode Island, like the 4 people who live in Rhode Island, like 2 of them have to be senators. So like that's bad enough to start with, but then filibuster means that you can't, like even if you have a majority of I mean, you could have a minority of senators who more people voted for than the majority of senators. That definitely happens. But like, even if you have a majority of senators representing a majority of the public who want to pass something, then you can still stop it. And I think that it's not a coincidence that historically this has been used so much for things like what it's, maybe about to be used for voting rights, because, these are the kinds of things, I mean, going back to the 19th century when, it was started, which, and by the way, I mean, it's maybe worth taking a second to say, I think a lot of people sort of vaguely assume that this is something that's existed for like as long as the Senate exists, or, it's
right. Nancy Pelosi was out there at the demonstrations yesterday talking about, or on MLK Day, talking about how this isn't in the Constitution.
No, it's not.
No.
No,
we just made that up, and we're fine with that, I guess.
Yeah, not only is it not in the Constitution, for the first couple decades that after the Constitution, there was actually an explicit, like the Senate rules included something explicitly saying you can't just keep something called the final question rule. It said like you can't just keep talking forever if that's going to like if it's reached the point where it seems like you're not trying to like debate the merits of the bill anymore, you're just trying to stop it from being voted on, you can call the question and and have a vote, and that was eliminated like accidentally. Aaron Burr was after he killed Hamilton actually was chairing a commission to like basically overhaul Senate rules, try to make it more efficient, whatever. And they like act like this wasn't even intentional, really. Like they were just sort of getting rid of a bunch of stuff at once, and nobody quite realized that they were getting rid of this. And this created the possibility for doing this. And this is really something that like in like the decades leading up to the Civil War that like Southern defenders of slavery figured out that they could do to stop basically anybody from talking about slavery in the Senate. And after that, right? I mean, it was like the main thing that it was used for up until like the late 20th century was like blocking anything that even kind of sort of smelled like civil rights. Because if you're defending things you can't really defend on the merits, then hey, if nothing else, you can just stop people from voting on it.
This is, there's another piece out in Jacobin about how the filibuster is actually very, very popular with the Chamber of Commerce, which is the big corporate lobbying. Yeah, because it defends corporate power. I don't see anyone talking about that. Everyone is talking about, voting rights, which of course on their own are important. And of course, people can easily make these mental links to, well, if everyone doesn't, if all the people got the vote, then the people's voices would be heard. And then we would have things like healthcare for all, or, people aren't going to vote against whatever. So, but they're not making the jump. There's because this is being presented by corporate media and even, activists who are very worried about having their own voting power taken away. Very few are talking about corporate power, corporatism, capitalism. We even covered some of this on our Tuesday show, covering the protests on MLK Day, and we clipped some in his own words, how Martin Luther King spoke against capitalism. He spoke against the corporate state, and that, of course, is what got him killed. It wasn't the racial stuff, really. Who is talking about this today?
Can put an even finer point on that, saying that, like Bernie Sanders tweeted the other day, like specifically what MLK was doing, when he was killed. He was obviously killed in the hotel, but like what he was in Memphis to do was to support a strike. That was the thing, that the purpose of the trip, on which he was assassinated. And by then, a lot of the sort of mainstream liberal media had turned against him because because he was going from sort of like attacking these like boss hog type like regressive like people who like nice northern liberals could think, oh god, that's so horrible, right? Somebody should put a stop to that, right? But he was talking about how he was talking about de facto segregation of the North. He was talking about a multiracial movement of poor people, and also big one, right? He denounced the war in Vietnam. He gave the Beyond Vietnam speech. The same year he was assassinated. So yeah, I think I think that's really important. And it makes a lot of sense that the Chamber of Commerce loves the filibuster. And this is where it gets a little tricky, right? Because those those two senators who didn't want to name earlier are a convenient excuse for a lot of things, and they all are also like legitimately. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know there's lots of stuff that like Biden and Schumer and Pelosi would actually love to do that, like those two people stopped them from doing. Like that's how bad it is.
Right? Should I put the picture up of the two?
Yeah.
Those who shall not be named anymore. It's like not giving the shooters in a school shooting.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like things are so bad that even stuff that like pretty awful corporate centrist Democrats want can't get through. But also though, the stuff that they don't necessarily actually want that much to get through, these guys are a golden excuse for, because they could just say, hey, what are we supposed to do, right? Our hands are tied, and so, we couldn't do it if we wanted to, which is kind of true. So it's a great excuse. Although sometimes also they could totally do it if they wanted to, like when the $15 minimum wage was going to be included in reconciliation. And so it wouldn't have to, so it couldn't be filibustered. And the Senate parliamentarian said, no, sorry, you can't, the budgetary effects aren't significant enough. And all of the Democrats pretended that they were powerless before this, before the non-binding opinion of a staffer who they could literally fire anytime they wanted to, as in fact, Senate parliamentarians have been fired before when majority leaders haven't liked their rulings.
Yeah. Well, one of the article that I was making mention of says, corporate media refuses to tell the story of the money behind the filibuster, even though it's out in the open for everyone to see. That Democratic leaders could spotlight the grift, and instead they're basically showing their real loyalties when they refuse Manchin and Sinema to actually vote on the party's healthcare, climate, or anti-poverty legislation that their corporate donors oppose. And that makes a lot more work for us indie medias to have to point out, well, this is what they're opposing. They are opposing in West Virginia, the right for teachers to organize. There was a huge teacher strike there not too
Yeah.
long ago. We got to get those people to understand that the guy that some of them voted for actually would say, actually, you don't deserve, a raise or health care or water from the drinking fountain that doesn't have lead in it, or to retire not in poverty. That is what the guy is basically saying. Man, this guy who will not be mentioned.
And here's the thing, by the way, while we're talking about West Virginia, that kills me about this, because I understand, like, the thing the centrists will say, and unfortunately, they are kind of right about this, is, nobody accepts, that, like, the problem is that, like, if you ran a challenger against him in the primaries, maybe you should do anyway, but, like, they have, like, that person would probably lose. Like, he's not losing significant support in West Virginia because he's seen as, like, a thorn in the side of, like, Biden and the Democratic Party. If anything, that's probably good for him. All that's kind of true, but also a lot of the specific things that he's blocking would actually be super popular in West Virginia.
So right? I know it's like people wanting to own the libs so much that they are okay with their kids living in poverty. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, I think this is the fault of the Democratic leadership, because the way that they have talked about all this, right? Because consistently, what does everybody always talk about, right? Like, it's always, like, anytime anybody was talking about the infrastructure, anytime anybody was talking about Build Back Better, can remember that far back, then, like, it was always like the price tag, that,
how are we going to pay for it?
And the thing is, like, even the Democrats even mostly talked about in terms of the price tag, because they wanted to emphasize how, like, bold and big what they were doing or whatever was. But, like, if it's just an abstract number, people aren't going to get mad at you for blocking it. If you're actually talking about, like,
healthcare, care for the elderly, your elderly parents.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you actually did it in terms of the issues, I'm not going to claim to like be able to have some magic bullet for how to get that guy out of West Virginia or whatever. But I think he would get a lot more heat even in West Virginia if people were actually talking about, like, a lot more about the actual specific things that are in here. Like, this guy doesn't want you to have daycare. He doesn't want you to, except, he doesn't want you to have clean drinking water, all that stuff.
Well, we can't expect that from our corporate media, can we now? Because they benefit from him. So we're on our own, Ben, creating our own non-Rumble. By the way, you can just sign up if you want to be on. Anyway, you don't have to wait for the.
No, I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna do that until I actually get handed an envelope. I know. I'm just giving it away.
All right, I knew this would happen because we have all these great conversations and these talks, but we have a couple of other things that I wanted. One is kind of one of those things that you already know, but somebody did a study on. As it turns out, a tax on global mega rich could help lift 2.3 billion people out of poverty. Who knew? But the fact is, it's great to do a study because those studies get into occasionally the news cycle. So the Fight Inequality Alliance and the Institute for Policy Studies, Oxfam, and one of my favorite groups, the Patriotic Millionaires. Those are all advocacy groups. They have obviously been warning people about the corrosive impacts of wealth inequality, which of course has only gotten worse as this pandemic has gone on. Let us discuss those corrosive effects and what we're seeing, Ben. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of amazing. It's such a simple point, but it's one that so many people try so hard not to get. Like, back in October, I did a debate with Charles Kirk from Turning Points USA.
I saw that. Boy, that was something.
Thank you. And he said, I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'll take it as good.
It was exhausting, but you did great.
Well, thank you. But one thing that guy loves to say, I think he said to me, certainly he said it, whether or not he used this line there, I've certainly seen him use this line a bunch of times, is that just because somebody is getting richer, that doesn't mean somebody else is getting poorer. And
you're like, well,
it kind of does. Like, at the very least, right? I mean, maybe not technically, because they could be going up at the same time, one faster than the other, whatever. But like, at the very least, one person getting richer means that one person is much more poor than they would be if they had some of that money, right? I mean, like that's like there is only so like,
Exactly.
even if the pie is growing over time, whatever, economic growth, like there is only at any given time, there is only so much to go around, right? I mean, like the world only has so many resources in it, whatever. And so, yes, if some people get a larger slice, some people get a smaller one. I mean, that's just
Especially if those people don't pay their taxes and offshore all their money, and then don't even, yeah.
Yeah,
I hate to use the term redistribute the wealth, but the government does redistribute the wealth when it, takes all our tax money and hopefully doesn't spend it in the military industrial complex, but spends it on things like healthcare and roads and bridges and pregnancy coverage, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I don't know. I mean, it's like,
2.3 billion people lifted out of poverty for these folks to get like a tax, all of which would be below 5% of their billions and millions dollar income. It's
crazy. It's ridiculous. And this is something that you only like. I mean, we were talking about democracy with the filibuster. I mean, this is a democracy issue on a much bigger scale because the only way you get a distribution of wealth like that like literally you have a group that you could have like less than 5% tax on and lift 2.3 billion people out of poverty is if most people don't get a say in what that distribution of wealth looks like. I mean, if you put it up to a vote, not to be too simplistic here, but like if everybody gets input on this, then, I'm not saying you're going to have a completely even distribution of everything. You could have like, even in like a worker cooperative, I could, I don't know, we think you'd be good at something that would involve a lot of stress and responsibility. And you say, okay, but I mean, I'm going to need to, like a salary bump if I'm going to do this. And we might all decide to vote to give that to you. Or conversely, if there's some like really dirty and dangerous job nobody wants, you might be able to convince your fellow workers to vote for that. But like nobody's ever there's no scenario where anybody's ever sitting down at a meeting and they're like, okay, Jeff is going to be paid 5,000 times more than the rest of us. Raise your hand, if you
Jeff has to sit home and do nothing. He's not going to be emptying out these tar pits. That's not what Jeff is going to be doing. This brings us to the conversation about essential workers that have been going on, given what the New York mayor, I think he called them.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Because I mean, in a saner economic system, people like you and me who could, when the pandemic started, we could just, whatever, do our work on a computer, and stay, safe with our families. Like in a sane economic system, we would be paid less than people who have to show up in dangerous conditions, especially that like first year before anybody was vaccinated, like to like you'd have to pay people way more or else nobody would do that. Like the fact that in our system, people still did it. I mean, that's just a sign of how little meaningful choice there is. Because nobody would go out to risk getting a deadly disease, so they could work the cash register at McDonald's or whatever if without even being paid anything extra for it.
And they're essential to the corporate states to keep the corporate state running. They're not, but they're also exchangeable.
Nobody would agree to do that if they weren't desperate. Like if they didn't think the alternative was going to be even worse. Like in a situation where we all had about the same choice, right? Like nobody's going to step forward and be like, "Yep, I'm going to do it. I know those burgers aren't going to flip themselves. You don't even have to pay me a penny more. I will take the risk."
Christopher Hedges wrote a piece about how he is pinning his hopes on organized labor. And then moving on to our next story, unfortunately, there's a new piece out also. Oh my goodness, this is so sad when I looked at these graphs. That here we go. Unfortunately, there really was no Striketober. A piece by Doug Henwood said that everyone is desperate for signs of life in the American working class. But there was a lot of talk of Striketober a few months back, but the new Bureau of Labor Statistics data throws cold water on that idea. And there was really no strike upsurge. This disturbs me greatly. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it disturbs me too. I think that, yeah, no, I mean, obviously that's bad. I would very much like there to have been more strikes than there were. And I mean, I guess there was still, looking at his numbers, I mean, I guess there was still a little bit of an uptick, but not nearly what we would have liked to think.
I'm going to try to show you hold on. Let me just try to show you there were a lot of good graphics in the article.
Yeah, no, it was depressing, but I
super depressing.
But I
Here
think,
it is.
Okay, we got it.
Yeah.
All right.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I was gonna say, yeah, right. Like, and of course, the real thing. I mean, the most important part of that graph isn't like what happened like just now, right? It's the first, the contrast from the from the 60s,
right.
the 1970s, when it's crazy to now, when it's all like sort of going along this little, it's like way down at the
right
at the bottom. And in the last couple of years, it's like, again, I think
we'll take anything, any sign of life from labor.
yeah. I think he did say that there was, anyway.
Well, also some of the things about these images, a lot of people were actually not working at that time. There was, the numbers are sad when, again, as you said, compared to the 1960s. But I do think that even the idea that we made up a little name called Striketober, and it hit the mainstream media, and there was the PROS Act that was making its way to its death. I do think that is important. I think that the pandemic showed the need for organized labor. The airline union had to do a lot of work in order to keep themselves safe and to keep the passengers safe. The flight attendants union. I think the talk itself of labor is like, oh, we have labor. There's labor. And that may be hopefully waking up a sleeping giant. I'm hoping.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I guess I would also say this, even if the numbers aren't what, it felt like they were, and what we certainly hoped that they would be, I do still think there are a couple things that have happened in the last few months that are really good. That, like, so one of them is that, like, I mean, just the fact that we have unionized Starbucks now is huge. Like, that's the kind of thing that was just totally resistant to unionization before. And the more people see that, right, the more they say, oh, why can't I have that, right? And also, I think that it's really good, like, that we had stuff like the John Deere strike and the Kellogg strike, which, by the way, I got to say, when they were bringing in scabs to Kellogg's, they had to get them in from Ohio because nobody in my home state of Michigan would do it. But
that's wonderful. I love to hear that.
But
Ohio's okay. They'll do it. Interesting, because it's out of state, so they don't feel a solidarity. I
think that's probably more what it was. But yeah, I think the fact that those were two, like, big high profile strikes that were pretty short and they were successful. Like, I mean, the contracts weren't perfect, whatever, but I mean, like, they had they pretty quickly got a contract that was better than what they started with. I think that's kind of huge, because, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, like, the 90s, when you had stuff like the Detroit Free Press strike, where, like, you'd have these big or Caterpillar or whatever, like every time there was like a big high profile strike, it felt like it would, like, last for 5 years, and then they'd end with something that was, like, worse than what they started with. And it was dismal and demoralizing. So I think just having these, like, high profile victories is huge. And yeah, I think the fact that, like, kinds of workplaces nobody really thought could be unionized before are being unionized, a little bit, starting to be, I think that's good. I think that if we, I think if the numbers, aren't where we want them to be at least, like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just trying too hard to sort of see,
hope. Well, I think, capitalism, and it's become even clearer during this time of COVID and lockdowns and isolation, whether it be lockdown or just I'm afraid to go here or afraid to go there, have really pushed people away from that sense of solidarity that organized labor can give you. And organized labor is sometimes bipartisan. I remember I was covering the Bessemer strike, and the person I was talking to said, we don't, some of these people voted for Trump. We're just here for this. And they're in solidarity for justice as they see it, which I think is actually a very hopeful, it's a hopeful space from which we can spring. And, this solidarity is sorely lacking. Sense of camaraderie, community. It's sorely lacking in today's world, and that benefits the corporate state. And I could go on about that. So I too put a lot of hope in a resurgence of labor.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's huge. Actually, I heard the same thing about John Deere. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was like more than 40% of the workers at John Deere had voted for Trump, and that's great because this is like, whatever chunk of Trump, of like Trump voters are savable. I mean, this is how they're going to be saved, is through this. I mean, like there is a reason why, like go back to Mansion State, West Virginia, like there's a reason why, West Virginia, was solidly Democratic for decades, which is that, the miners' unions were so huge, and which is, by the way, also the reason that Trump won it the first time, because he lied to people and said that he was going to bring back the mines. And I think that if there's any, like, and I mean, I'm not saying like the big goal is to like get people to vote for, Democrats or whatever, right? Democrats suck, see above. But like, I think that like, winning, but I think that like winning people over to left-wing politics and to something, something better is, I think it's going to have to happen that way, right? Because if we're just doing like endless culture war, and
I think we should just stop telling them that sharing is an idea that's on the left. Everyone's for sharing, but you know what I mean? Like,
because if we're just like, because like if your big strategy for winning these people over is like yelling at them that they're racist, like I'm just going to tell you right now, that's not going to work.
That's not going to work.
But like if you could like maybe have like appeal to them, based on like shared interests and and that
right.
sense, like that could start to move people in a better direction. And I think certainly historically it's the only thing that's ever worked.
So those were the three stories that I picked out to talk about, but you wanted to discuss a CRT story that you've been following.
Yeah, so Virginia just introduced another one of these anti-CRT bills. It was
critical race theory, in case you're just waking up.
Yeah. If you're a normal person and
right.
You're not like if deluded with this stuff, like deluged with this stuff, although deluded's also good. Then critical race theory. So the allegation is, people are teaching critical race theory K-12 schools, which, I think the actual connection between academic critical race theory and anything that's likely to make its way into high school classroom in Virginia is pretty tenuous. But like, I think the more important point is, I was kind of thinking about this because I was watching how people are reacting to it. And now some of it was just, they're having a little fun with the fact that there was this huge blooper in the text of the bill, that they were like listed off all these historical documents that people should read in high schools, and they mentioned the Lincoln Douglas debates, but instead of saying Abraham Lincoln's debate with Stephen Douglas, they said with Frederick Douglass. So it's different guy, but like so people are making fun of that, right? But like otherwise, I think this goes right back to what we were just talking about in a different way, because on the one hand, I think there's a level that like all this is just a silly distraction, right? Like I think, like if you're like a politician, you're running for office and like the Republican wants to talk about CRT, you should ask them why they don't want to talk about jobs and healthcare. But like, if you are going to talk about this, I kind of think that we're doing it wrong, because I mean, I think these bills are awful, right? Like in many ways. And I think a lot of the agenda is to attack public education because it's one of the few things in our neoliberal hellscape that's A, publicly owned, and B, at least in, huge parts of the country, unionized.
Exactly. Thank you.
But
it's all coming together, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, but that's why
Yeah.
they hate public school teachers. Unions and public ownership. But like I think a lot of times progressives will really push back against this stuff by basically saying, again, basically yelling at people that they're racist. And I'm not saying there's nothing to that, like I'm not going to be the guy who's going to die on the hill of saying that, like, there's no racism issue in like right-wing politics in America, right? But
I think just say to people, your facts are wrong, because racism is a fact-wrong issue. Like, a lot of your facts are wrong. That's
no, I think for sure. But like, I think, I think the way, like, but I think one reason that's not going to convince a lot of people, one, they've just heard it too much. There's like a boy who cried wolf problem, right. But like, another is that, like, I think they kind of know that, like, okay, look, if you speak like online progressive speak, I know you can be a racist without having like super bigoted thoughts in your head. But if you speak the way that most ordinary people speak, right, they know that lots of people support this stuff who aren't super racist as they understand that term, right? But whatever, put that aside for a second. Like, the way I think we should be pushing back against this is a free speech issue. Like have, like why, like classrooms are places where people should be encouraging critical thinking, that, that they could be exposed to other points of view, and, they can think about it. And we shouldn't think that their fragile young minds have to be protected against dangerous ideas. We could just.
But I feel that way when I send my kid to school, when she comes home singing about war. She's like, the soldiers, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I gotta, my daughter is in kindergarten, and they sent a letter home warning us, public school, that they were going to be teaching racial sensitivity in the different grades. And it was really an interesting letter, because my daughter being in kindergarten, I was like, I was like, racial sensitivity. I don't know how early they become racially insensitive. And I don't know, we grew up in the city, so there wasn't any lack of diversity. And in her school, there's really no lack of diversity at all. There's it's a whole thing about diversity and their inclusiveness and part of the curriculum. And I was a little annoyed personally that they sent a letter home warning us. They have to tiptoe around. To me, the idea of like skin color, body shape, height, and everybody's beautiful kind of thing is what they teach. You just teach that in kindergarten. You don't need to send a letter home to
it says something about what people are freaking out about at any given moment, right?
And they're all like, we're also gonna do the masking. So it was very like, don't yell at. And I could tell when I was in conversation with some of the administrators there, they were like, I said, so you're going to do the masking? And they were like, well, yeah, we really think it. And I was like, good. And they're like, oh, you could just tell that they were
that they're
concerned, rightfully so.
Yeah, of course, right? Because they've seen, even if it hasn't happened there, they've certainly seen all the videos of people getting screamed at school board meetings and, and all that stuff. I think that, it's funny because, as you said it, what it made me think of is, going to like middle school and high school in the 1990s. And at that point, even in, I didn't exactly, grow up in like Waco, Texas or something. I mean, it's in like a fairly liberal part of the North, but like even so, the thing that people tiptoed all around just a little bit was talking about like evolution stuff and things that would sort of offend religious people who are going to make a big deal about that. And it's not, they didn't do it, right? But there was a little bit of like,
have suggested that this was right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
don't freak out. Yeah.
Yeah. You could tell,
Yeah.
they still do it, but you could tell they were doing it in a way where somewhere in the back of their heads, like, okay, nobody relay anything to anybody's parents that's gonna like lead to like some kind of complaint that like that we're not that we're like forcing anything on anybody or we're not sensitive enough. But this is the new thing, right? I mean, this is what they have. This is what they're doing now, right? Like in the 90s, maybe it was like there was still. I mean, even in the 2000s, there were still all those like court cases about teaching intelligent design and stuff like that, right? But it's like that's what it was then. And like in the 80s, I don't know, they were freaking out about like like heavy metal and Dungeons and Dragons, like
Right. Yes. So true.
But they always have to have something, and it makes sense, right? Because they're not like. One thing that they absolutely can't do is appeal to people based on the idea that they're going to like put more dollars in their pockets or like make it easier for them to to have take care of their kids or have health care or anything like that, because they don't want any of that, right? I mean, so there has to
be a culture war.
Yeah, always.
I remember Tipper Gore going on, I don't know, Phil Donahue, and being like, what did she say? Like the rap music or, oh no, about the video games. Yeah, she was very upset. And,
Prince, Tipper Gore was really upset about Prince also.
And the left then gets paint. Oh God. Yeah, it's a wreck. Well, this has been an interesting rundown of top stories the left is talking about, not just top stories like Mansion and Cinema do XYZ. I really, every time I'm watching them report just the misinformation and the lack of coverage about how the filibuster serves a corporate state makes me turn it off and make my own show.
There's a story about Noam Chomsky where he supposedly he was at the dentist, and the dentist asked him, he's there with his first wife Aviva, and the dentist asks, him if he grinds his teeth. He says, no, I don't grind my teeth. And then asks Aviva, well, do you see your husband grinding his teeth? And he says, no. It's like, does he do it at night? I don't think so, right? They're like tried like crazy to figure it out, and then she finally figures out that it's in the mornings when like she's in the other room and he's sitting there reading the New York Times, and like that's when he's grinding his teeth, because he's like so pissed off about how
actually I had to rewrite that title, because I often look at what the New York Times is covering so we can have a conversation that's realistic. And they were saying this, their desperate push to change the filibuster in order to get a bill through, like the voting rights bill, so that it will stop, they
right.
And that's supposed to be the liberal, the democratic friendly pay. It's all corporate friendly. I think we should stop with the labels and just be like, you're a corporatist, or what's the other side? You need what's the other one? You can't use populist anymore because the Trump people took that.
There's always socialist.
There's always socialist. That's going to be the name of our new segment, Ben, when you come on regular. Ben Burgis, thank you so much for joining me on the program. I'm so glad that you were here and that we were able to like spend all this time talking about all this great stuff. Don't forget to go out and get Ben's book. It's brand new and it's out now. Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. There are also other books, including Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. And if you need Ben immediately, go to the pod before the book can be delivered. Go to his podcast, Give Them an Argument. You will enjoy it greatly. Thanks so much again for being with me, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Juliana.
That's it for the show today. You've been watching Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. Our guest has been Ben Burgis. Go check him out at his Give Me an Argument podcast. Coming up next week, John Nichols of The Nation is going to join us. First of all, he has a new book out about pandemic profiteering, and he names names, and we're going to do that here on this show. Secondly, we've been covering Marianne Williamson's Endorsee Summit, where she is endorsing and trying to basically raise the profile of these progressive candidates who are running. Some of them are running races that they're probably not going to win, but we do need to talk about what is happening with progressive candidates across the country. So on Tuesday, we're going to talk with John Nichols about how important it is to raise these people's profiles, how important it is for these folks to take up the mantle of what Bernie Sanders said and run. We're going to see what happens then. I really am looking forward to talking to next week. We also have Chris Hedges coming on the program for, more conversation. We're going to be talking to him about labor. Anyway, you've been watching Act TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. Don't forget to leave your comments in the comment section, and we will see you next week.